We don't like to complain, don't like to be seen as that fly in the ointment who's causing a problem. But in this issue, you must raise your voice, especially where you get that kind of pushback. If they're not showing you the curriculum, there's a reason why they're not showing you the curriculum.
Steve Bigu, it's always such a pleasure talking to you. It really, really is. And we are talking before we we're recording, just the wonderful work that you and Christian Concern do. And it's a huge privilege, not just for those who are Christians, in fact, but for people from all faiths and none, much like our own supporters who benefit from the work you do around free speech, around the rights of parents and all sorts of things. And we're going to be touching Steve, on RSE and related topics today. And first of all, just say hi to our viewers and our listeners, would you?
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Tony, and to the Coalition for Marriage. You do some great work highlighting really key issues that people need to be aware of. So any way that we can support you, Concern can be of support to you, and I can be of support to you. We would love to do that.
Great. Well, what we're going to be talking about today, Steve, is this concept of teaching RSE in schools, both junior schools and secondary schools. I want to be as positive as possible, and I suppose what I really want to do is twofold. Is one, to encourage parents of the need to get involved positively with what's being taught in schools. And then maybe we can finish off with, well, if things aren't working out with your school and you have some objections, what can you do about it and what direction can you take? If it's okay with you, Steve, let's start there. You are head of education, so you know about these things at Christian Concern. Why do parents need to get involved with what their kids are being taught these days?
Well, Tony, it's clearly an area which has gone through some huge changes over the last few years. There's been a great increase in interest in this kind of area, because the from 2020 onwards, particularly, the government required schools to be having, as you said, relationships education in primary and relationship sex and health education in secondary, and slightly different terminology in different parts of the United Kingdom. But this has caused a greater focus on this by schools. And it's important to note that a lot of organisations have flooded schools with their resources, flooded schools with their training. And a lot of what we've been discovering over the last few years has been really disturbing a lot of Christian parents, actually disturbing a lot of Christian teachers and
Hmm.
teachers, whether they're Christian or not, up and down the country have been disturbed by what's been going on. And some great reports came out. Miriam Cates MP was instrumental while she was an MP in highlighting some of the things that were being taught in schools that parents really weren't fully aware of. And so there's been this huge increase in teaching about homosexual relationships, being transgender, really getting children and young people to think through questions about sexuality from really quite young ages, and through content that's been provided by lobbying, politically partisan organizations that have particular ideological view around these issues, which particularly, Christian Concern, we have Christian parents and Christian teachers contacting us saying, I really I can't join in with this. I mean, this is very disturbing what's been coming in. And the good news is that at Christian Concern, we've been able to help many parents, many teachers to be
Hmm.
able to change the mind of the school on the kinds of ways in which they've approached these subjects, these areas. But parents have had to make sure that they are aware of what's going on, get engaged, get involved, really be vigilant around what the school is saying it's going to do, but also be vigilant and asking questions, being inquiring as to what is actually happening in their schools in this kind of area, Tony.
I wrote recently something about just in the media recently, Telegraph, Mail, other outlets have highlighted the fact that in Scotland we've got some children identifying as animals now and it being accepted. So you've got somebody identifying as a wolf,
That's right.
which you didn't hear that wrong, a wolf. So you go from, well, actually, sexuality is fluid now to species is fluid, and you can identify as a wolf. And we're in the crazy situation where some schools are accepting that. But it's like the newspaper article I'm thinking of said, well, there were 5 kids involved. So we're a big country. There are thousands of schools. This is 5 kids. Is this an issue that most people, not the wolf thing now, but the activist teachers, the activist curriculum, is it a thing that most parents needn't worry about?
No, everybody should be really, really quite concerned about this. What you're highlighting there is the tip of the proverbial iceberg. When you teach children that nobody really knows who you are apart from yourself, and the only way you can discover who you are is to go to your feelings. You can't trust the authorities of doctors. You can't trust the authorities of your parents. Certainly can't trust the authority of God. I mean, if there is one, couldn't trust that as an authority. The only authority you can trust about who you are is yourself. You create yourself. When children are taught from that perspective from a young age, well, of course, when they get to an older age and they're struggling with issues and they're told that the silver bullet for all their problems is to recognize that they're not the gender that they thought they were, and maybe even they're a xenogender, which is this idea of being a different species. Well, of course,
Mm,
well, if the only way you know who you are comes from that understanding of yourself and that perspective, well, of course you can self-identify as a wolf, and everybody needs to affirm that. It's the logical conclusion to nonsense at the foundation of the thinking. And yet, children up and down this country are being directed to think in these kinds of ways, not to trust the fact that a doctor said you're a boy or a doctor said you're a girl. But these doctors, this is what they're told. They just assign some kind of gender to you on the basis of external bodily characteristics. It's only you who really know who you are. So, actually, this kind of teaching is going in all over the place in so many schools. And there are scores and scores of organizations, LGBT organizations, which again pour these resources in so that when the teachers come to delivering curriculum in this area, where do they go to? They go to these normal sources and even government sanctioned sources. And so children and young people are receiving this kind of teaching, this kind of information. Those of you who come from
mm, mm.
traditional religious faith backgrounds will be surprised at their children suddenly coming out to them because they will have been encouraged in this direction by the many pride clubs that there are in many, many schools. And if you wanted to become aware about this, Tony, many of your listeners might be shocked at the kind of things that we're saying here and saying, "Oh, well, it can only be the few extreme places." I do encourage you to go onto your own school's websites and just do use the magnifying glass in the corner that says search, type in LGBT, type in pride, type in gender identity, type in these things and see what comes up, and you will sadly quite possibly discover that schools in your area, maybe even the schools that your own children are going to, are facing these kinds of teaching and this kind of ideology being encouraged to them, which is very confusing, very damaging, very harmful, and parents need to raise their voice about this in any way that they can.
Yeah, and again, what just to pick out some of the words you used there, some schools, a lot of schools are encouraging and promoting. And again, the problem is that these are highly politicized matters, politicized with a small p. They're, so different political parties, different groups of people feel very differently about these things. And the Education Act, Section 406 and 407, is quite clear that the school needs to really be very, very balanced and objective rather, about political matters, and clearly a lot of schools aren't. They're being, they're promoting, as you say, and focusing almost exclusively. I have the privilege of going up and down the country and meeting lots of our supporters, thousands of them, and the number of teachers who've told me that they've been asked not to talk about marriage and long-term relationships in school, and you think, well, how bizarre is that? And they've asked for advice on, well, what do I do? Could you get parents to talk to schools? And here's another reason why I wanted to talk to you and encourage people to get involved as you're advising them to do, is because often the teachers rather, are scared they'll lose their jobs if they say anything. So, and they feel, well, the parents actually, they've got a position of authority to be able to say to the school, we object.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how far that goes because We've got situations like in Wales where the right of withdrawal has been removed, so you can't take your children out of these lessons. You've got court cases going through the courts like Claire Page, who the Information Commissioner said, well, no, you've actually haven't got a right to take away and look at what your kids are being taught. And she's saying, well, that's ridiculous that a parent doesn't have the right to take home the material that their children are being taught so they can look at it, etc. So what would you advise? So you've said go to the search icon on the school website, type in some of these terms. What else can a parent that proactively wants to not kick a fuss, but just get involved with what their kids are learning? How can they really do this? How can they get involved?
Yes, well, that's hopefully those that are listening will increase in their vigilance around this area because they've taken the time to listen into this interview, and I would really encourage them to take time to read the school newsletters. I know you get a lot of emails in your inbox, but read those things, particularly with vigilance around this area. There are key points in the year. I said, October is one, February is LGBT History Month. Again, there'll be a big push then, and of course in June, really have your antenna up in June during what's called Pride Month.
Mm,
That schools are supposed to be involving you as parents in their consultation around the kinds of curriculum they teach in this area. Get involved in those consultations. Raise your point of view. As you rightly say, Tony, there are many teachers that are thinking, well, I wish some parents in this school community would raise their voice about this issue. This would allow me to speak about this well in my school setting, being an advocate for those parents. Because you're right, many of them are in fear, and you can see what's happened to many teachers. If you look on our Christian Concern
yep,
website and get in touch
yep,
with our
yep.
regular emails, you'll find out the ways in which we've sought to protect and serve teachers who found themselves in those kinds of circumstances. And I would encourage parents really make sure you're talking to your children, ask your children about what they are being taught in these kinds of areas, and probe them around, well, what do you think? What do you believe about gender identity? And make sure you as parents are explaining to your children what you think and what you believe. Because if you're not teaching your children about these things, somebody else somebody else will be and probably already is. And they're quite likely on the internet exploring these kinds of things as well. So a real vigilance and awareness for parents. And these are ways that I'm talking about, which are ways for them to get involved. You can also, I mean, asking to look at the resources is something which that there are rights that you have as parents to be able to see and know about what it is your children are being taught. Some of those things have been tested in court, but government guidelines is quite clear that you should be able to know about what your child is being taught about in relationship and sex education. Part of the problem is these controversial issues are being embedded all across the curriculum. It's not just in one standalone lesson, and which is why this broader vigilance is really important, Tony.
Yeah, and I think again you raised such an important issue there that let's remind parents that they are the chief educators of their children. They hand that across to the school, but they are the they should be in charge. And really, it's I mentioned this so many times, but the book by Kimberly Ells. I'm just going to mention it again, the Invincible Family. In there, she talks about how communism was defeated in Hungary, and she says, it was terrifying because if schools went and if students went to the school and said their parents disagreed with the communist state, well, their parents would get arrested and could worse could happen, and you feel we're not far from that in this country, to be honest with you. But the thing that made the difference was once they could trust their children, once the children were old enough not to go and just blab in school, they would take them in the evening and say, what did you learn in school? Right, here's the truth. And how that just led to a whole generation growing up who just didn't believe the communist theory anymore. And it just evaporated. And you kind of think that's the key here. Parents need to get involved. Parents need to get involved with what their kids are being taught. What did you learn today? What was the emphasis on this, that, and the other? Well, actually, you do know that that's not necessarily correct, don't you? And for parents to really get involved like that, that's the point you raised there
Yeah.
is so important, Steve. I
Yes.
can't stress it enough.
And what you said there about when they got to a certain age, I think
Yeah.
that's a really important point. And I'd like to pick up on that because our
Mm.
younger children, they don't know what's going on. They can't
No.
understand the
No.
nuances that the the transgender teacher that is speaking to them that they have to call Mux rather than Mr. or Mrs. That they
Mm,
can't understand quite what's going on with all of that.
mm,
They're being
mm,
soaked in a certain kind of ideology day after
mm,
day, the hours that they
mm,
spend in school. And I know some parents are making very bold and brave decisions around this. They are choosing
mm,
to home educate. They are choosing
mm,
to go to independent private school settings where they
mm,
know that these things will not be pushed and they will not be promoted. I think it's really important for us as parents to recognize that when you give your child to somebody else and they're teaching them, you are giving them a certain level of authority. You're delegating authority to them, and your child who sees you doing that and sees all of their friends' parents, or they're also sending me to these teachers. There is an assumption that what the authority is saying is true. I mean, how many times did have you heard? Well, Mrs. Smith says this, or Mr. Smith says that, because the authority figure there to them is a very important person, and if those people are sowing cynicism around sex and gender, are sowing ideas around morality and what marriage should or shouldn't be to those children, they will soak this up. And it's not a simple thing to just unravel that with a little conversation after school every now and again with younger children. Whereas those who have been trained well and brought up well, when they get to maybe 14, 15, 16, they might be in a position where they can push back and
mm.
understand quite what's going on in the educational environment around them. But that's a very big ask of very young children, and I can understand why so many Christian parents that I know have started to even home educate their children to really make sure that their children aren't being indoctrinated in these ways.
Well, I can't remember who said it now, but children are like wet cement. Whatever touches them will leave an impression. And well, there's the proverb that we both know, that train a child up in the way they should go, and when they're older, they will not depart from it. And everyone knows that, and that's why there's a focus on young children and teaching them things which might not have been taught in previous years.
I love what you've said there, Tony. I mean, there's this passage in Deuteronomy 6 in the Old Testament of the Bible that says, impress these good commandments on your children, impress them. And the word impress there in the Hebrew is like taking a sharp implement and engraving carefully onto soft clay. It's to impress on the impressionable. And there's only a certain period while the clay is soft that you actually write on the tablets of their hearts, if you like. And it's really important parents to recognize, I think it was the Jesuits used to say, give your child until they're 7 and I'll show you the man. There's so much to be understood about those younger ages and what we do, the education environments that we do allow them to be a part of.
In conclusion to that first bit, then, we're encouraging parents, carers, get involved with what your kids are being taught throughout the curriculum. It turns out, not just RSE, RSHERE, RSE, whatever the letters, acronyms are. Get involved and find out what they're being taught on a daily basis. But then, if you're in a situation where you think, actually, I'm not happy with this, the school aren't listening to me, what's the next stage?
Well, we've written a resource which you can find on the Christian Concern website in our education section, issues section, which is called How to Successfully Raise Your Voice, because we've been supporting so many parents up and down the country with raising these kinds of issues with their schools. And if you can raise them informally and get a hearing, please do that. I mean, so much is based around the relationship that you have with those teachers and with the head teacher in the school. But as the older that they get, often there's quite a distance in that relationship. So as much as you can to have informality and communication with a relationship that can change things so you can raise your issues in the most agreeable ways. It's amazing how many schools don't realize, oh crumbs, we didn't mean to be doing that. Oh no, well, of course we shouldn't be following that. Or oh yes, those curriculum resources, they are a problem, aren't they? When parents have raised them in informal ways. And so that's a really important first step. Those that are of Christian faith, I always encourage them to pray really, really hard for their schools and for their teachers. They're doing an incredible job and often under huge stresses and strains. But where you find that you are not being well received and you've discovered, well, I'm getting all sorts of ideological pushback here. I'm not able to, for example, see the curriculum that I should be able to see, or I'm being labeled in certain kinds of way by the school for my views. You do have a right to complain, and every school has got its complaints policy, or should have, according to the inspectorate, certainly should have its complaints policy there on its website. Go there, look up the complaints policy, and activate the complaints policy. A lot,
Yeah.
a lot of us are very nice in British society. We don't like to complain, don't like to be seen as that fly in the ointment who's causing a problem. But in this issue, you must raise your voice, especially where you get that kind of pushback. If they're not showing you the curriculum, there's a reason why they're not showing you the curriculum. And if you make that complaint, that needs to be reported to Ofsted in terms of what the school has to explain to Ofsted, the number of formal complaints it's had, and then you follow that formal complaints process to the letter as it's explained on their website in the complaints policy. If for some reason it's not on the website, then you ask them for the complaints policy. And that requires the school to do an investigation. It requires the school to go through all sorts of processes and certain timescales so that what you're saying can be properly considered. And if you can get others not to join you necessarily in your complaint, but to make their own complaints, this actually creates quite a headache for the school in the way in which it has to process things. I would say as well, the head teacher has a huge amount of authority and power in their school. If they palm you off by saying, well, no, we have to do this and we have to do that, or this organization says that, or the Church of England tells us we have to do this, that, or the other, you need to be able to recognize that it's the head teacher who really decides what curriculum is being covered. And so if in your pushback, the head teacher dismisses your complaints, then you should still complain to the governors about the head teacher's conduct. And that requires the governors to then get involved, or the school board up in Scotland to get involved, to be able to push back so that this is fully investigated and that your concerns are properly considered. So there are ways to approach this informally, but also formally. And parents need to have the confidence and courage often to go down that kind of process. And we at Christian Concern are there to support those that seek to go in these kinds of directions.
That's great.
And
Yeah,
sometimes we need to
that's
to
brilliant.
provide legal letters, to help schools recognise their
Yeah,
legal responsibilities, and that
yeah.
sometimes has also helped make the changes in schools that we.
Really, really helpful, Steve. And I love that. If you can get others, join with others, not necessarily one complaint by many people, but everyone making the complaint together separately, then that has strength. Not being fobbed off, the idea of, well, we've got to teach these things, it's in the Equality Act. No, the Equality Act talks about access to the curriculum, not content of the curriculum. Don't be fobbed off by silly things like that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And also going to, like yourselves, Christian Institute, there are other organisations that just look on the web. Obviously, if you're not a Christian, if you are a Christian, fantastic. Look at the resources that you're talking about, but speak up, do something, say something, because it's really, really important. And maybe even if you find it within yourself, why don't you go and be a governor?
Yes,
Why don't you go and do that? Why don't you I get not everyone can do that, but why don't you go and be a governor of the school and make a difference from that level as well?
absolutely.
Because again, the more people, involved in that kind of area, the better, I'd have thought.
That's right. I agree entirely.
Well, listen, I do have cause for optimism. I think there have been a lot of useful legal challenges. Your organisation is behind the majority of them, I have to say, in terms of the use that you've had and the use that the great progress you're making nationally for Christians and non-Christians. More people are seeing the need and also being willing to speak up and speak out. Again, it's nothing to do with offending people, or it's just saying, well, actually, I'm the chief educator of my child. These are the things I would like my child to learn as facts, and not be promoted those politicized agendas, if that's okay. Thank you very much. And again, it needn't be aggressive. It needn't be hostile, but it does need to be quite firm.
That's right. No, I agree with that, Tony. That's right. And we've had, if you look on again the Christian Concern website, you'll see the kind of legal cases that we've been fighting. The one for Christy Higgs recently, really important free speech issue. We just completed the court case there. We're waiting to hear the results of that, where she'd complained about the kinds of things that we're talking about here in her school, and then was sacked from a different school where she worked. These cases are important for us to be successful on, and any kind of awareness of that is being erased by us talking about these things here. That's so important to strengthen that resolve in parents with their freedom of speech in this kind of area.
That's right. So it's not just the legal cases being won, but actually people knowing about them. Because again, I get it. Teachers are busy, heads are busy. Some activist comes along and says, look, here's a bunch of material. It's all prepared. It's all legally, valid, whether it is or not. And it's very hard for the school, to resist not taking it, because it just saves them a lot of time. Steve, you're there. Other people are there. If people need to talk, need support, the key message is get involved with your children's education. It's really important, especially when they're young, that they hear about good things around marriage and other sorts of bits and bobs like that, which lead to the best version of the next generation, etc., and not just one side of the story. And thanks for all you're doing on that, Steve. Keep up the fantastic work, and we'll speak again soon.
Yes, I look forward to speaking to you again, Tony. Bless you.